On in just a second. I just want to say thank you to everyone who is here, especially Joao, because it is 6 o'clock in the morning right now, so I really appreciate that. What I think is really something important that Joao and Leah and I talked about, and then also last year when Sarah Fogarty from Seresin came to town, came into Chicago and also Wisconsin, was that because we look at New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc as something that is so ubiquitous, so everywhere in the United States, and is such a big category, we really miss the terroir, the people, the place that make us love wine. And so having the opportunity to not only have people come to the market to really tell that story, but also having the opportunity for people to really place and understand the terroir and the terroirs and the winemaking that goes into making real wine. Seresin and Momo are exciting because they aren't traditional New Zealand wine. They have a very different point of view about it, while still honoring the terroir of Marlborough and really trying to amplify it through their site in Rock Creek. So we're gonna dive right while we wait for Leah to get on. We're gonna dive right into the terroir of Marlborough with Joao Corbett. So Joao is the viticulturalist for Seresin. Originally from Brazil. And why don't you give a little bit of a biography of yourself, and we can start there and how you got to Seresin, and then let's talk about the region.
So good morning, everyone. Pleasure to be with you guys and to talk a little bit about our wines and region. So I come from Brazil. I have a background in agriculture engineering. So back in 2005, I started working with table grapes back home. I came to New Zealand first time in 2007. That's when I started working with wine and grapes. I started straight away in a biodynamic and organic farm, which I learned quite a lot. At university, I had a little bit of understanding about biodynamics, but it was what really working in New Zealand that not only the understanding and the knowledge and the passion grew. I worked pretty much all those years for that site, and it's been 2 years, so 2 full seasons that I'm at Seresin. Taking care a little bit more now because we have a few olive oil groves as well. We make olive oil, some livestock, and pine nuts, and a garden, a veggie garden that we not only produce some food, but as well where we grow all the herbs that we need to make the biodynamic preparations. So that's me.
Where did you make wine in any other regions outside of New Zealand in the past?
Just
or to work as a viticulturalist?
Just Marlborough.
Oh, fantastic.
Since I was hooked.
So you've been obviously in Marlborough for your entire time as a viticulturalist. What do you say sort of separates or defines Marlborough as the terroir of Marlborough and as a wine growing region?
Yeah, the region is really special. We have we are on the top, so in the northeast side of the South Island. It's pretty much divided into 3 valleys, and we are in the southern valleys. The formation here, that's the beauty about this. It was like formation was glaciers, so in rivers. So you have from alluvial and really free drain soils until the hillside starts, and quite a lot of silt lawns, soils. Um, the the beauty about it, it's about the ranges that we have that protect us in both sides, west and east. So we are really facing north. So that north face, especially for us here in latitude that we are, in summertime when we are in the growing season, the amount of sunshine, it's unbelievable. So we have really long days with extraordinarily amount of sunshine, which promotes a very good ripening, and as well cold nights. So later in autumn, you start getting the cold nights just before harvest. It really helps to bind all those compounds, and as well to keep the acidity, but as well having everything ripen in a good way, in a good fashion. So this is the main reason. Like this is a very good, yeah. The region in the terroir is super special.
And what's the general soil types that you'll find at the vineyard?
The vineyard is mainly it's silt loam. We do have different percentages of clay, and these will play quite a good part in how it holds water and as well how it drains. Um, and we have, yeah, so we have a few blocks they are almost flat, and then we have the hillside, which is majority of the vineyard. We have the hillside. The hillside is much more silty, long clay, much more like heavy soils. In the flats or the almost flats, they have a little bit more of a fine sand loam. So they are silt as well, of course, but a little bit more drainage.
I'm going to put up the map of the vineyard so you can talk a little bit about where those different soil types are as well.
Perfect.
So obviously today we're going to talk about Sauvignon Blanc and we're going to talk about Pinot Noir, but the vineyard is really the vineyard itself is really good for many different types of varietals. Is that correct? What are the other things that you're growing, and which soil types, which areas do you devote towards Sauvignon Blanc versus towards Pinot Noir and the other varietals that you're working with?
Yeah, we have a good variety good diverse mix of varieties here. So we have Chardonnay, we have Pinot Noir, Pinot Gris, Semillon, Syrah, a little bit of Viognier, and a few in Riesling as well. There are a few vines of Gewürztraminer as well, but this because that's one of the blocks that was stop grafted, and then sometimes we have the odd arm that is a little bit of the Gewürz, which we do use as well. We pick to make the field blend, the Chiaro Scuro, and a few other. So we have a very diverse, mainly the Sauvignon Blanc is mainly planted in the areas that we have the fine sand, silty loam soils, so slightly more drainage, and not as heavy as the hills. And the hillside is where we grow most of the Pinot Noir and the Chardonnay as well. So there's two varieties that we work pretty well with, a little bit more heavy soils. Yeah, so now you can see.
Yeah, sorry about that. Thank you.
That's all right. So on the left side, you can see those three blocks lined up. There's a boundary that goes all the way, and this is the west side. And these three blocks, they are a mix of Pinot and Sauvignon, and it's exactly where the changes of silty lawn with sandy, with fine sand. And on the north of the last block, we're starting to get a little bit heavier, the soils. And then on the right side of the creek, as you can see, there's a creek that cuts the property almost in half. And in the other side, there is much heavier soil, much more percentage of clay, and then more water holding capacity. It's a less free drain soil, which brings some really good characters to Pinot Noir and Chardonnay especially.
Fantastic. Now, in terms of, there's 3 major growing regions, correct, in Marlborough?
Yes.
And you said, and you're in this, and we're in the southernmost in Rifle
Yes.
Creek, or it's okay. And what are some of the differences between? Can you name those 3 regions, and can you tell us a little bit of the difference between the Rifle Creek area versus the other 2?
Yeah. So the 2 other regions. So we are in the southern valleys. We are part of only 5 different valleys. So we have the Waihopai Valley, the Omaka Valley, the Braincourt, Fairhall, and even a little bit of the French Pass as well. And we are the southern, of course, as the name tells, the southern valleys. We are really in the south. We have the Wairau Valley, which is a little bit further west. And then we have the Awateri Valley, which is a little bit east from where we are. They are all the valleys. They have the same profile of protection from those ranges. So all the ranges that comes up, and all of them, they are facing north. So this is the one of the main reasons for them to be good regions for wine, especially when we have the solstice, the summer solstice. The sun is down there and goes all the way. So really, really long days during the summertime, and he gets the vine capacity of photosynthesis and producing carbohydrates and all the phenolics and flavonoids and tannins and compounds that we want. All of them has these characteristics about having the ranges and being northerly faced. They are very different when we talk about temperature and rainfall. The southern valleys would be the coldest and as well the driest of the other three regions. Awateri and Wairau, a little bit more, they do have more rainfall, and the temperatures can be just from more or from less as well. It can be quite cold, but it can change depending where the wind is coming and how the patterns is coming, and can be quite warm as well. So they definitely behave very different from each other. So the plants ripe in completely different stages. That's really good for, there's a few companies that even have vineyards in all these places, and they can harvest them in separate times. But sometimes they can run pretty much the same and everything comes at once, as it happens in 2020. This season was pretty much consistent weather in the 3 regions.
Fantastic. Let's get into farming at the vineyards. I know, since this is obviously your specialty. I know that there's been a focus for a long time on both organics and biodynamics. When did that start at the winery?
So Seresin, pretty much, Michael Seresin was really passionate, is really passionate for biodynamics, and organics is really the way that he his vision about producing things. So if we can do this way, why wouldn't we do that way? If we are making something that is that's at the end of the day, it's almost like food. It's the way that we nudge ourselves. This started back in the 90s, 92 to 96. And the vineyard started to get certification really early 2000, the organic certification, and then a little bit later on, probably 2004, 2005, we got the Demeter certification. We are the only certified Demeter certified in Marlborough, so we are the only biodynamic certified here at the region, in the region, and as well BioGrow certified as well, which is the organic standard. That's a very, I mean, we have a quite strong ethos when it comes to how we farm. We look to the property as a whole living organism, and we try because it's really a genuine try to mimic nature. So our philosophy is to have life as much as we can in all levels. So this we work that one of the things being a monoculture, which is the vines are out there. We have the olive groves as well. We have the pine trees, and all these trees and vines, they are productive. As well, we have the gardens, so we bring some other species that we plant some food, some vegetables, and as well the biodynamic preparations, herbs. We have livestock, so we run these livestock all over the vineyard. So we bring that animal presence as well. And we work very seriously as well with cover crops and putting quite a few species. Every year we introduce new species to the vineyard and work with quite high numbers with cover crops as well, from 20 to 30 to 35 species. And all these species, they have a reason why. So some of them are going to fix nitrogen, so then we don't need to bring anything from the outside. We are producing our nitrogen in the soil. Some of them are cycling nutrients, so they are scavenging nutrients in the soil, bringing it up, and then incorporating the soil again, making available for the vines and even for the other cover crops as well.
Joe, can you give a couple examples of what of each of those, what you're planting to make those different effects happen in the vineyards?
Yeah, so majority of the nitrogen fixers, they are clovers, but we use lupins as well. This season, I'm using lupins, I'm using tick beans, and I'm using 7 different species of clover. So these, and why to go like this so high is, depending on the weather, we never know when we start a season, we don't know how the weather is going to be. So some of these species, they will go really well if we have a shortage of water. Some of them are going to be really going to grow really well if it's a little bit more, the moisture is a little bit higher. And some of them will just play around in between. So then we just to make sure that we have species that are going to adapt if something changes during the growing season. Scavenging nutrients, there's a lot of species that you can plant, and these can be dandelion, can be plantain, can be different kind of clovers as well. Extract some nutrients out. Mustards, they are really good as well. Not only scavenging nutrients, but as well fumigating. If you have any problems of with grass grubs or anything like this, that normally in the outside of the blocks. So tap roots, So the tap roots help us to, because we are in this silty loam, and especially in the hills with the clay content, we need something to help us to make some, just to improve the drainage, to break that hard pain that sometimes it builds up, and to avoid going with machines and turning soil and everything else we use. So, for instance, parsnip, carrots, radishes, beetroot, anything that really creates that root that is a tap root that breaks the soil.
Oh, cool.
And yeah, well, and as
It's
well,
is this all are all of these things or most of these things indigenous to New Zealand that you're bringing in? Or are you seeking, things from outside to sort of influence?
there's we use both things. We use things that we can find in New Zealand. I'm working with people here from with NMIT as well, which is a institute here in Marlborough, that we are just going a little bit deeper in to understand the species that are natives. So then we really would like to start putting more and more natives, but we do play with exotic species as well. And this because it's how much knowledge we have with the other ones that are available. The other thing as well is availability, really, because to find seeds, you need to find someone that produces seeds, and the guys that are starting to produce some of the natives, they have a really limited amount. We do some trials, and it's that's some really good things out there, and hopefully in a couple of years we will have a little bit more of a seed bank to rely on.
Steve,
In,
can you see me?
I can't. I cannot see you yet.
Cannot. I can see myself. So I'm not quite sure.
Here,
Okay.
now I can see you. I'll pin you up.
Okay.
Welcome. There we go.
Hi. Sorry.
No.
Went a bit weird. I was pressing the wrong buttons. Hi, I'm Leah Seresin. Okay.
So, keeping on, in terms of Marlborough in general, and obviously with all of the different crops you're planting, what are the disease pressures with the region specifically?
Over here we have powdery mildew will be the first diseases that affect the vineyards in the early stages. And then that's not a really good huge pressure of downy mildew. It's more the powdery mildew, so the oidium. It's the main disease here. And then late in the season, it's botrytis. So those two are the ones that we need to open our eyes and just understand that we don't have too much pressure. It's been really good seasons, both 19 and 20 being dry seasons. We didn't have pressure at all. So this plays a lot with not only moisture, so if the rainfall is a little bit higher, but as well canopy wise. And because our vines are in a level of vigor that is quite medium, it's moderate vigor. There's nothing that goes out really. We don't use chemicals, we don't use fertilizers. So the way that we do is everything the organic way, so the compost and the cover crops, and the way that we play and we fine tune the vineyards is to get that perfect vigor that doesn't allow the canopy to be super thick, that doesn't allow the plant to have more than it should, from leaves to bunches and everything else. But those two will be the diseases that causes the most concern here.
Sorry, I was trying. Hold on one second. Can you talk a little bit more about? I have some pictures of yours, I believe, from the 2020 vintage. Can you talk a little bit more about about that vintage specifically?
Yeah. So 2020 vintage started with a very wet winter. That was really good because we managed to get a really good amount of water in the subsurface. So that clay that we have here, the clay holds quite good amount of water, as well organic matter, and playing around with the cover crops and everything else. This gave us a really good start. Um, Spring was quite mild, and when I say mild, it's quite warm. We did have in December the temperature falling a little bit and having really cold nights, which was holding a little bit the growth, which was fantastic because then the growth through the vineyard was really consistent. So the whole vineyard was growing in the same pace, slow, and just getting their way up to the top wires. And then January, February, very hot, very warm. And late February to March, we start experiencing some really cold nights and cold mornings, which was fantastic because that's when the flavors start coming up, and they were really good. Like the flavors were spectacular, really. And those cold nights really help a lot to hold that acidity and to allow the plant um, to get all the grapes in a best. We can wait for the grapes to actually reach that level of ripeness that we want. So that was beautiful. Was definitely a historical vintage.
Well, I guess, it is the elephant in the room. Let's talk about how it was to harvest during and do a vintage during a pandemic.
Yeah, was rather interesting. At the beginning, the first 2 days when everything happened, everything was really fast, really quick. We start harvesting, everything was well, fantastic. Everybody were really happy. The crew was here, the gangs coming to pick, and we started with the Pinot Noir, and when we had the understanding that the level 4 was coming and lockdown and everything was very stressful a couple of days because we needed to, the whole thing. There was a few guys that I needed to send home. There was a lot of practices that we had to put in the vineyards to make sure that everybody was safe and we were, all the guidelines and everything else. So it was, and as well, we didn't know what was actually happening. So we were, are we going to be able to finish it all? And when you spend a year working so hard and taking, so well, there's a lot of really interesting and fantastic fruit out there, and it gets a little bit of a panic situation. Say, I need to pick those grapes. Like we worked really hard. They are looking and tasting fantastically well, and that was it was a little bit stressful in these 2 days, but then everything came in place. We were working in a really good and dynamic way, and we managed just to push with less people, which was amazing to see the engagement and the commitment of everybody as well. The same sense of, no way, we did so well so far. We are going to get these out. And so it was a fantastic energy and but very interesting. I mean, very different, of course. And there was something that we were. One of the things for me being at the vineyard, normally I have a contact with the grapes. I take the grapes to the winery. I, help them tipping them in the tanks, and I check them every day as well. And this season I couldn't do that. So I was tasting samples and things like this. This was the for me was probably the most difference, because I couldn't actually see all the fermenters and everything transform into wine the way that I normally see, which is touching, grabbing the mark, smelling, tasting the juice straight out of the tank. But yeah, I mean, we're quite happy and lucky as well to be able to harvest everything. Everything is safe. Everything's at the winery, tasting really good already. So yeah, that was the.
That sounds well. You made a really good situation out of something fairly terrible. So that's very heartening to hear.
Yeah.
Well, since we focused on sort of the where, Leah, I'd love to bring you in to talk a little bit. A, introduce yourself, and then B, talk a little bit about the creation of Seresin and Momo.
Absolutely. So, hi guys. Sorry, a little bit technical difficulties at the beginning. Anyway, I'm Leah Seresin. I'm the daughter of Michael Seresin, the owner of Seresin Estate. And yeah, it's lovely to spend this time with you. I was prefer to be there in person, but hey, this is better than nothing. Just to say, okay, a little bit of background history. So the vineyard was set up in 1992 by my father, Michael Seresin. We are originally from New Zealand, but we left in the late 60s because his other career is as a filmmaker. So we moved when I was a very young child to Europe. I had my first birthday in Rome, and then we moved to the UK. And I talk about this in the sense that when he left New Zealand in the mid 60s, there was no wine culture there. It really was a bit more like Prohibition America. It was like, kind of lockdown, pubs, whatever. And that kind of and alcohol was considered something like men go to the pub to get drunk and women stay at home and drink a sherry. So when he arrived in Rome, he fell totally in love with the fact he walked into an environment where wine was part of life, where it was done. It's not about getting drunk. It's about sitting down with your family, your friends, and food. About bringing people together. So it's not just about the quality of the wine. It's how wine is, in a more kind of conceptual way used. And he absolutely fell in love with that. I was brought up in Europe with this idea of wine. So when he went back in 1992 to set up the vineyard, he went very much with the idea of creating in the new world a sort of old world winery in the new world. So taking all the best of the new world, with innovation, all the kind of freedom you have, taking the rigor, the elegance, the aging potential, that wine is something to be cherished. So I think very much from the start, that was his philosophy. So 92 was when we started. We started with nothing, started with the first wines. 96 was our first vintage. Initially we were farming like conventional farming. Very quickly, talking to his winemaking friends in Europe, he became very interested in organics, and very quickly we then decided to work organically. Then, being my father, he then pushed it to the biodynamic. One of his big things, like, why make wine? If you can make wine without chemicals, why not? So I think it's almost like, because he comes outside of the wine world and the film world where everything is possible, he pushes everyone he works with to do the best they can and to think outside the box. The person is always we're now 27 years down the line, but it's been with this rigor, especially with biodynamic farming, philosophy of the wines that we make. It's about making wines which are, I think, a really representation of terroir. Things so wonderful. We've got Zhao here talking so intimately about land, because I think I love a winemaker. That's fundamentally about creating those in the most natural and organic way possible, to then create almost a wine that is like a total expression of terroir. So that's always been our philosophy with Seresin. About 6 years into creating Seresin, when we started working organically and just starting to farm more biodynamically, we realized that we're, fundamentally the Sauvignon Blanc is what Marlborough is known for. So he was really interested in the idea of creating a wine that was, I guess, a little bit more accessible on every level, financially, to be drunk younger, a bit more, I guess, evocative of your typical Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc. But he wanted to create it as close to our biodynamic representations as Seresin was. So this is when we created Momo. So
one quick interruption. If everyone can make sure they're on mute right now, just because we're getting a little bit of an echo to Leah.
So
thanks.
Basically, Momo, I was looking for, we have so much information. It was about 7-8 years in from Seresin that we decided to create a wine, like I said, a little bit more accessible. Momo is a Maori word, and it means offspring, which I think is really beautiful. So basically, Momo is our child. And it's like it's a little younger, a little fresher, a little bit more, like I said, accessible. It's there. It has never been certified biodynamic, but apart from the Sauvignon Blanc, the wine has always been made very much in a similar way. We always have the same winemaker, always made in the winery. As I said, like Momo Sauvignon Blanc is the only one of our wines that we bring in some organic fruit from other growers. I think it's about 35%, isn't it, Michelle, around that. And these growers have been working with us for 7-8 years. We've helped manage their vineyards as well. As I said, I'm going to talk about Momo. So like Momo, up until very recently, all of the wines at Seresin and Momo were wild fermentation. Tamara Kelly Washington, our new winemaker, from 2018, she started using the Alba Fria yeast. I think this is just to create, because Momo is a little bit more, we want to create, I guess, over the vintages a little bit more, just to make sure that it's not the quality, that there's a similarity. So it's a little safety net for us. Which again, this discussion became between my father and Tamara, and that was agreed upon. But fundamentally, Momo is our child. It's the young, fresh, bright wine to be drunk, like more quickly, not looking at aging. But fundamentally, the philosophy is the same as Seresin. I was lovely. I had a lovely chat with Zhao the other day, especially with the Pinot, things like. There's the machine harvesting. There's a little bit of, like I said, the Alba Fria yeast within the Sauvignon Blanc. But I think if you're going to describe Momo to Seresin, Momo is a wonderful introduction to the vineyard, like an accessible, immediate, fresh, bright, young, but with the same winemaker, same winery. And then we go to Seresin, which is a little bit more time, a little bit more aging potential, a little bit more textural quality. But even with Momo, it's funny, I've just been looking at the notes today. The fact that, and this is more, coming from Tamara, we really believe in spending, putting the wine on the lees. So even with the Momo, so the 2018, which I think you guys may be tasting today, it had 3 months on lees. So this isn't normal for your typical Marlborough, push it out Sauvignon Blanc. So it adds this wonderful textural quality, but you have those wonderful passion fruit, tropical, herbaceous notes, a wonderful crisp finish, but within that you also have this lovely textural quality. And I think, Zhao, you'd agree, I think the thing about Seresin wines, and when Tamara, our winemaker, was in the UK recently, with all the pre-COVID, we talked about the Seresin wines in a very textural way. And I think that is something that really sets us slightly apart from most of the winemakers in Marlborough. So, I know we're doing a little bit of tasting today. I sadly don't have, because it's COVID, I couldn't get any samples in from the Momo. I have some of the Seresin Sauvignon Blanc, which I may try with you, because it's actually 8 o'clock in the evening, or nearly 8 because I'm allowed to have a glass of wine.
Well, I have a bottle of the 18 in my fridge, so I'll grab it and I can talk a little bit about tasting notes once we get to that point. While I'm going to that, since we are kind of leading into it, can Joao and Leah, can you talk a little bit more in detail about how Sauvignon Blanc is actually made, how it goes from the vineyard into the winery, how the ideas of farming are translated into the winemaking of Momo and Seresin Sauvignon Blanc?
What I would, and I'll start quickly. I mean, I think when we were talking, I've just been speaking about the Momo. So Momo is much more done as a typically Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc. So you're taking, it goes to steel tank. There is no other varietals involved at all. We have 3 months on the lees, but fundamentally it's about the juice things. When you go to the Seresin Sauvignon Blanc, we've always been slightly different. And again, it was about creating a wine with more aging potential, against softer textural qualities. So within the Seresin Sauvignon, we always add a very small percentage of Semillon. It depends on vintage, but it goes between 3 to 8%. The Semillon, and about 15%, again, dependent on vintage, is aged for around 11 months in neutral barrique. So again, even though it's I've got one here, even though it's a Marlborough Sauvignon, when it's about the Seresin Sauvignon Blanc, it actually does have that little bit of Semillon, that little bit of neutral barrel aging for about 25% of the wine. So you're taking it away from your typical Marlborough Sauvignon. Momo, I would say, out of all the wines we make, would be the most typical of the Marlborough Sauvignon. Seresin, you're going in a slightly different, so as I said, you're taking on these textural qualities, slightly more, savory qualities, which you may not get in the Momo. Xiao, I'll pass it to you. What would your thoughts be on that?
Well, I can definitely talk a little bit about how we grow the Sauvignon Blanc. And so at the vineyard, it's always like it's a really fun variety to grow. It's really consistent in growth. What the idea is to get the canopies and the plants very lush and vibrant, and keep the vines going a little bit more. So this is pretty much the only variety that later in the season we might use some water to just keep the canopies and the plant more vibrant, and not with the approach that we normally have with the Chardonnay and Pinot, which is more stressful. We really like the water stress and everything. We use very little amount of water here, but the Sauvignon would be the one that we keep things a little bit more ticking a little bit longer, just as a canopy, and to make sure that it gets that vibrancy and that those characters. Me and Tem, we work really close together, so every season is different, and we play a lot with how we are going to manage the canopy, manage the interrows, and even the dropping fruit, to make sure how much fruit per vine we want as well. It's always a lot of sharing, and ideas, and going back to the vineyard and going back to the wines, and really trying to fine tune pretty much what we produce here.
Are you doing a fair amount of green harvesting or thinning for Sauvignon Blanc?
We do, mainly to avoid any clumps. Sauvignon Blanc, in a few years, sometimes, it's not always, but it can develop some like big bunches. And whenever they are like just too close to each other, and you don't have the airflow and the sunshine that actually helps to keep everything clean and nice, we need to intervene just in thin, make sure that you have them really separate, really well distributed in the canopy. So yeah, we do. It's a practice that we always every year as well, because our yields are considerably low yields if we think about how normally Sauvignon Blanc is actually grown grown here in the region. So they first starting with shoot thinning, that we select shoots, and after going to actually green thin and fruit thin.
Well, it shows here, I think, towards what Leah was talking about, the idea of I think usually in my experience with New Zealand Sauvignon Blancs, it is overwhelmingly. I always like to say it hits you right away and then it disappears. But something that I'm noticing in the Momo 2018, and obviously also especially in the Seresin, is this combination of this focused farming, these lower yields, this focus on texture, gives the wine a little bit more, I guess, sort of like a little bit more of an hourglass figure, for lack of a better way of putting it. You do get some of that fruit. I get some tropical fruit, but it's not ripe tropical fruit. Even on the Momo, which what I love about this wine, and has been, a change from me being on sommelier, is that this is the kind of wine that appeases the person who wants New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, but also the person who doesn't want New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. You get some of those, a little bit of the ripeness of New World, but a lot of the texture and the acid and the minerality of Old World. So here you are getting a little bit of that sort of green note, but it's a little bit more minty. It's not vegetal as vegetal. It is it is grassy, but grassy as in fresh grass, not as I don't know. Generally it's not my favorite descriptor, but there's something nice about it, and fresh.
I think the introduction when the New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc came onto the scene in like the 80s. I think it was such a wonderful introduction, and it really shook the world. But I think I don't like a one-note wonder. I think the thing about we've always tried that, we don't want to pretend not to be New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. We're very proud of being it. But then, like I said, as a little, as I was saying before, about our philosophy beforehand, or like when my father set up the vineyard, was taking the exuberance of the New World, but then having the underbelly of culture and time and this wonderful like mélange of the two. And so that, you are getting a New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, like Momo Sauvignon Blanc, would be the most typical of a Marlborough. But again, like I said, it just has that little bit more length, that little bit more elegance, that little bit more. There's a sort of softness and gentleness to it, and then when you take it then to the Seresin Estate one, you take it a bit another level. Which is why, I said our wine has always been about, which is so desperately sad for me at the moment, because we definitely normally do a lot of on-trade, working with restaurants, working with chefs. So it's a wonderful, I love when I work with chefs talking about the food that can go with this, because I think you have these wonderful layers that are there for relatively simple wines. We are not talking about our Chardonnay reserves, we're not talking about our co-fermentations. But I think there is a complexity and a depth and an elegance from the Momo, which is our lightest and brightest, to the Seresin, which I think you see that there is a world where we're coming from, that we do set ourselves apart. And it's when I was talking to Zhao yesterday, just in regards, I think we are quite special in Marlborough. We talked yesterday about who could we compare ourselves to in New Zealand, and actually I think we both agreed, Zhao, there was not another vineyard or winery within Marlborough that I think we do stand alone. I think we stand alone also, especially now where, up until quite recently we had 3 vineyards on the property spread out throughout the Marlborough, like the Marlborough Valley, the Wairau Valley. Now we are in the southern valleys of Marlborough. And it's quite an atypical Marlborough setup. You have more altitude, you have more, I don't know if you've seen the photographs. It really does not look like typical Marlborough wineries. I think and that's what's so exciting for us, that especially when we go on, say, to the Pinots, that within our, 200 acres, that we have such a variety of aspect, altitude, soil variation, which allows us to then create these incredibly different variations of the same varietal. So we either make beautiful blends of them, or when we get to our top Pinots, for instance, like the Sun and Moon, where we take a tiny block and we express that just for that. But I think we are really quite atypical for a Marlborough winery, because where we are with Ralpo Creek, which is, I would say one of the most beautiful vineyards, probably the most beautiful vineyard in Marlborough, to be honest. We have no surrounding vineyard, there's very few surrounding vineyards around us. Again, working biodynamic, this whole thing that we have, the sort of, we're not a monoculture, with the olive trees, with the cover crops, with the animals, with the biodynamic farming. We really have this wonderful, almost, as my father always used to say, I mean, I guess his ideal, he used to look at like sort of 15th century wonderful books about Tuscan farms. And the whole concept there, that it was like, it's a total culture of food, animals, wine, everything. So basically, I think we've been trying to create that in Marlborough, and I think we're getting really close to it. And what's wonderful about winemaking, and I'm sure you hear this all, like, we started off quite fresh and young. When Dad, I mean, the first plants, vines that were planted were like Chardonnay and some Sangiovese. I mean, it was ridiculous things. We just came. And then obviously you learn what actually works within your region, what works within your soil types. But it's a totally learning experience. And I think our wines are getting more sophisticated, more true to who we truly are. Then we bring on a wonderful winemaker, Tamra, for instance. So she's been with us. Just a little introduction about Tam. So Tamra Kelly Washington. She's been our winemaker since 2018. What's brilliant, she started after leaving university, her first job was in our lab. So this is 15 years ago or so. And she was like, wow. She then went off to Europe, did a lot of studying in Italy. She makes her own wine and studied a lot in Sicily. Then came back, worked in other New Zealand wineries. Then came back to us. And she has bought, almost having started with us and then gone off to the world, has come back in and has bought, I think, like especially with this Momo, I really feel it with the Momos. There's this linear, clean, fresh, but still textural quality that she's bought. She's actually, I think, brought a real identity to Momo. And I'm really excited having her on board. We wanted to have her here today, but like the thing is, because it's so early in the morning for her and she's got little children, she wasn't able to make it. But yeah, I think, I don't know how much time we have. I think the other wine we were tasting, which again, sadly, I don't have one because actually I never really get it, is the 2015 Estate Pinot.
Yeah. Can I get a little bit more description? Because I wanted to ask you, obviously it's traditional in Bordeaux to add Semillon, but what was the inspiration for the addition of Semillon in Seresin Sauvignon Blanc?
It wasn't about Bordeaux at all. It was about the very thing we were talking about, that we were finding those typical Marlborough elements, that too green, too tropical. It was about just softening. So that's why it's gone from like 3 to 8%. So it's never really about a flavor, like a 20, sort of 80%. So that's why it's never actually, we call it Sauvignon Blanc. It was literally just to soften the palate, to just, as I said, it was, and I think it was been Brian Bicknell, our first winemaker, when we were just finding the original Sauvignon Blancs were probably too harsh, as we thought, or too one-dimensional. We wanted to think, how can we almost bring out the best part of the Sauvignon by adding this very small percentage of Semillon? So it's never actually, we would never call it a blend. It literally is just there to almost, I always look at it, it's like, it's just softening the edges of the Sauvignon.
It gives it a little nice, for me, it gives a little, like, as he says, it rounds it out. It's a little bit of a peachier and sometimes a fuzzy characteristic, which also gives it a little bit of that texture too.
I mean, I've always thought that, especially like, there's a really autumnal, I think a lot with our white wines, and there's like an autumnal feel to them. It's like a apple that's dropped and you've picked off the floor. So it has this, like I said, that slightly softer, not that sharp green, which, like, in a blind wine tasting, boy, everyone gets a Marlborough Sauvignon. I love the fact that sometimes they don't get Seresin, because it just it's that subtle element. So it's just the wine to drink. So like I said, it was never done because of the Bordeaux blend. That was never the reasoning behind it.
Oh,
it was purely about just, okay, the fruit that we are getting originally was maybe too, I don't like to use the word harsh, but I think we just was like, okay, we didn't, okay, I remember we were like, viticulturists at the time, it's like, I don't want a wine that makes you go, I want a wine that makes you go, So I think it was just trying to find a wine or a way to make the wine just a little softer on the palate, add those textural qualities. Again, like, as I said, that we use the Semillon and about, again, dependent on vintage, a small percentage of the Sauvignon is aged in like neutral barrique. Again, it's just adding this softer quality. Again, allowing the wine, I think, a little bit more aging potential as well. But fundamentally, it's just, we don't want to bang you on the head. We just want wine to be like it's a softer expression of a beautiful Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc. And this is the way that we thought was best to present it.
And then, as you said, let's jump into Pinot Noir in the vineyards. What is farming like for Pinot at Seresin?
I mean, I'll do my little bit. I mean, I think. I mean, I know my father, as you know, Zhao, his idea of heaven was just to do Pinot Noir. He is absolutely obsessed with Pinot Noir. I think because it's so delicate, it's such, as he calls it, the heartbreak grape. It's all, you leave it to, you try everything, but fundamentally you just have to leave it alone. And it's about the viticulture, and the winemaking is very similar across from our Momo Pinot right up to our top cuvee, our Sun and Moon. I will now pass it on to Zhao because he's there and he can talk in much more detail about what they actually do with the Pinot. And but yeah, we'll come back to the estate Pinot to go through the tasting.
Yeah, so Pinot Noir is definitely, we spend a lot of energy. We really like this variety, and the site is really perfect for it as well. Especially the hillside blocks, they bring that dimension, as Leah was saying, how different it is. In a hill block, you have different from the soil. It does change from the bottom to the top. You have how exposed those vines are for the sun, for wind, for the cold, and for the heat. There is microclimates that plays a lot in here in Raupo. With that, we have as well 6 different clones of Pinot Noir. These clones are planted in different sections, different parts of the vineyards. Some of them a little bit close together. So we have plantings that goes from 3,000 plants per hectare all the way to 5,000 plants per hectare. So having that, what changes is the amount of grapes that you have per vine. We work really hard to make sure that we keep our yields in a very it's a very fine tuning. Anything that we do, like the Sauvignon Blanc, it's easy peasy to do these things. Like the Pinot Noir, there's a lot of we have to get our head together and around those plants, making sure that we have the balance on how many bunches we have there, how do we thin them, and when. And when you have more plants per hectare, you can afford to actually get even less grapes per plant, which gives you much more complexity. And yeah, it's just beautiful to work and to see how the different nuances and compounds from the Pinot Noir in these sites. It's just fantastic. Canopy management as well. We don't like exposing the fruit in the sun. This can cause a little bit of sunburn in the skins and just create some harsh kind of tannins. So but in the other hand, we cannot afford to leave that canopy there without opening a little bit to have the airflow, because this helps not only with disease pressure, but as well how the vines are actually lignifying the woods, the pips, the seeds, and everything else. So yeah, it's quite a lot of work that we do, and as well playing with biodynamic preparations as well in key points, to key stages, to make sure that we pretty much tell the vine where to go. We sometimes it's like, okay, you need to play your vegetative part here, and then there's a stage that we just shift and say, okay, now you need to focus in the fruit and to ripe the fruits, and then to get that maturity that we want to get all the tannins, all the flavonoids, all the compounds that we want to be really in the best standard, let's say. So it's really fun to play some. Yeah, it's great to grow.
Well, I think it's interesting. It's important. I think people don't think about canopy management in the same way, or don't really understand that there's basically no ozone layer above you. So the leaves are a huge amount of protection to the bunches, and that it's a really, really necessary. It's not about airflow. It's really easy for those bunches to get burnt.
Fascinating. The funny thing, I said, my father's not a winemaker with this, but he's a lighting cameraman and things like, and he's very absolutely obsessed with quality of light, and because that's been his world. And we talk quite a lot about it in the sense that, I find it, and I'm not an expert on any measure, but the fact that the quality of light in New Zealand is so different, say, to the quality of light in Europe, that the impact that will have on the grapes, on the thing. And so I think we really realise that in New Zealand this is huge, and so the whole concept of canopy management is huge on how, and it's something I never really understood coming from I lived most of my time in Europe. I realised that that's some soft egg, but when you go to New Zealand, it's harsh light. Mm-hmm. So if you're actually protecting your plants from that harsh light, as you were talking about sunburn, I would never even think about sunburn, maybe down in Almeria, or maybe somewhere down in southern Spain. In New Zealand, it's quite profound. And then so that idea that you're, looking after your plants by canopy management is quite beautiful. I think with the Pinot, I'll talk very briefly about the 2015 estate Pinot. It's not one that we've had in Europe, and actually it was just for the home market. You guys got some because it was done for a client in New York, and then they moved over to Chicago. 2015 was, I think, as I look at my notes, it was it was a cool start, a warm, dry finish. Quite a lot of smaller berries. I think sadly I can't taste it, so I'm literally doing off the tasting notes. Sorry guys, I'm candid. But I think it was lots of red fruit, lots of raspberries, lots of cherries, lots of but quite medium bodied as well.
Well, you're doing a very good job of describing it if you don't have it in your glass.
Really silky tannins, and it's kind of weird to talk about a wine that I don't taste. But the one thing I know within the making of the Pinot Noirs, fundamentally the viticulture is very, very similar. The winemaking really is, it'll be about yield, obviously age, but yield, smaller variations in time in barrique and how much new oak is used. I think it's 11% new oak on this, and I think it was again all about 11 months in barrique with a small percentage of new oak. But I think it's a lovely, wine. And like I said, it's a bit weird to talk about a wine that I haven't tasted. Sorry.
Well, I think it's a good representative, obviously, as you move your way up through Leah and Rachel and Rappo Creek and Sun and Moon, is there's a really clear line that I think goes back to the idea of how Sauvignon Blanc is made at the winery as well, is that this has its foot in a much more classic flavor profile for Pinot Noir. I think you are getting some of that raspberry cherry fruit, but it's as I like to say, it's still as part of a bunch. There's leaves and woods and all other things still connected to it.
I mean, I love that thing. Like, there's the woodland floor, and so you're doing a 2015, so it's had some age on it. It's got like 5 years on it, and I love it when it starts to get those, like, those slightly musky, earthy elements. And again, you know, I mean, like I said, I'm from New Zealand. I'm like my dad's not a Maori, my mum's part Maori, so I feel really part of the earth. You know, me and dad have big arguments about like the Maori culture. Like, no, I'm from that. You're not from that. But I think those elements that we bring about the earthiness, I mean, and that to me, a beautiful Pinot Noir. No offense to some of the more fruity varietals, I think I love the concept of aging potential. I love it when it gets a bit musky. And we try everything. I think we do a really good job, Zhao, of presenting from the Momo to the Sun and Moon. But they always have a similarity. There's a depth. And I think that's one thing about Seresin wines, from like Momo, which I guess you'd call easy drinking. I don't like that as a word. But fundamentally, there's a depth to all the wines that we make, from, like I said, the easy drinking ones to our top cuvee. And so when people say to me, like, oh, Leah, what's your best wine? You know, what's the best? I'm a bit like, well, it's really dependent. I mean, on a Tuesday evening with a bowl of pasta, a lovely glass of Momo Pinot Noir is exactly what is needed. It has the sophistication but it has the easiness. Now, for my son's 15th birthday, whatever night or a celebration, then we'll get a beautiful magnum of Sun and Moon out. But there's a through line between all of them. There's not one better than the other. They are actually made with the same commitment. Do you agree, Zhao? I think there's a commitment between the winemaking. We don't say like, oh, that's the fancy wine, that's the wine we just push out there. And I think the thing is, like, especially for you guys, like when you're tasting the Momo, I said which is, yes, obviously price point is easier, whatever. But fundamentally, the love and the commitment to the winemaking and the viticulture is pretty much the same as it would be to our top cuvee. And I think I'm very proud of that, because it means that I can be proud of all of my babies.
Well, yeah, I know that, especially when you think of winemaking in America and specifically Pinot Noir, it's these wines, Leah and the estate, have been really amazing surprises for me because of the fact that they do have that depth. You're not just talking about fruit, you're talking about earth, you're talking about floral notes to it. There is tannin. You know, these are the things that and great acidity, and these are what makes a great wine. And I think a lot of people's exposure outside of a very small group of sort of early Pinot Noir producers from New Zealand, and most of which not in Marlborough, is this sort of like soda pop, saccharine, raspberry sweet, very New World focused style. And what I love about this is, just kind of like the Momo, is that it isn't going to lie that it's in New Zealand. It's not pretending like it's from somewhere else, but it's also has that foot in really focusing on the texture, on the other, that makes people, wine lovers love wine, in my opinion.
And I think, and I'm deeply proud of the wines that we make, to be honest. I think, the effort that's put on, obviously, like, we get very excited, like Sun and Moon, which is like such a wonderful thing, but that's a very rare beast. And so, yeah, I mean, I just think I'm very proud, and I'm very proud of my father, because actually he's not the winemaker, he's not the viticulturist, but I mean, Zhao, you'll know more than anything, but I mean, he has a vision which is really, it's like a laser.
Well, he literally has his handprint on the label, right?
Exactly. So just say, guys, like, I mean, it's quite funny because, like, I mean, people keep saying, like, oh, what's the label? And the funny thing is, like, when we didn't invent the label, but, like, it was very much a family affair, like 26, 27 years ago, when we were setting up the vineyard, or when he was setting up the vineyard. So it's like, what are we going to do? Like, what are we going to call it? So Seresin is quite an interesting name. It's a Russian Jewish name. It's my his father's name, from Riga, Latvia, quite an interesting family. And then we're going like, well, you can't do Chateau Seresin, because there's no chateaus in New Zealand. That's pretentious. So my stepmother at the time, who was a beautiful photographer and artist, we like literally were just sitting around the table, all of us having had a nice dinner and some nice wine. I think we just thought, though, the handprint is a very profound kind of image. So I think she literally went and found some ink, put Dad's hand on it. Blah, blah, blah. We did a splat on a piece of paper, went and photocopied it. And we're like, actually, that's quite powerful. What I love from that is we agreed that would be great. And then we got a great, like, what's it called, a graphic designer to kind of obviously make it work. I now feel that, especially when I'm in places where the English is not the first language and I have to describe the wine to people in a very short time, I think the handprint really describes who we are. I think our hands-on approach to our winemaking, from what Zhao does, from the biodynamic principles, the hand picking, even to my job, which is a bit more, I guess, like hospitality. But I take absolute joy when next I can do it is going to restaurants, talking to the waiting staff, talking to the sommeliers, giving them a bit of the story, to give them a bit of hands-on something. So I think this really does show my father's handprint really is, I think, the vision of who we are. And in a very simple terms. And I've gone to like places where people go like, they can't remember Seresin, but they go like, oh, I want the wine with the handprint. So it's like there's something so kind of integral and passionate and really about who we are, which we keep trying to find focus. And it's amazing. I mean, I've had funny things. I don't see. I'm in London. Zhao's in New Zealand, and actually, we've spoken the most over the last 2 weeks with this Zoom stuff. So it's really great to get to know all this wonderful, in-depth knowledge about the vineyard via Zhao. But when hearing him speak, I'm like, yeah, that's what we're about. We're hands-on. We're there, deeply connected, deeply about creating beautiful hands-on wine, basically.
Yeah, I think, and what I think sort of connects to that, and for those people who are salespeople, whether they be on the floor or in a distributor, or is that what I think about these wines is that because you guys are trying to work outside of what has become a defined category, that it requires all of us to have a hands-on approach to actually getting this into people's glasses and getting them to think about outside of, what makes Seresin special. And in this case, it is all the people who are involved, and that hands-on approach and that willingness to go outside of, to paint outside the lines a lot more than you'll see in the region. So thank you both very, very much for your time today. I really, really appreciate it. It was great to learn more about what was going on in the vineyard, Joao. And thank you again. I never get up at 6 a.m, so I'm always impressed with people who do. And thank you so much, Leah. It's very clear.
It took me time to, I mean, like, I've got like so many things, like, which bit do I press, and I'm slightly a bit of a Luddite. I mean, because I am actually a real hands-on person. I'm missing meeting people face to face. I'm kind of getting used to this, and it's kind of getting good. But just thank you for organizing this, Steve, and thank you, Zhao. And I will see you in a couple of hours because we have another one.
Wow, I'm impressed with you guys. Well, please, anyone who's here, if you're in Chicago, the 3 wines that we tasted and talked about today are available at Bottles Up. And, I, again, really appreciate your guys' time. And Joe, I'll get some coffee, and I guess Leah have another glass of wine before the next one.
I'm going to make dinner now for a moody 15-year-old. And I'll see you in the vineyard in a few hours. Ciao.
Ciao.
Thank you, guys.
Bye, guys.
Pleasure. Have a fantastic
Thank you so much.
Cheers, guys. Bye-bye.